Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, March 2nd, 2022, we are continuing our coverage of the ongoing war that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine. And obviously, you can see on our map some things have changed, not drastically, but we are starting to see an uptick in some of the Russian operations, certainly in regards to the shelling and the use of some assets to locate and identify targets inside of some of these larger cities. And obviously, we're starting to see also some of the more indiscriminate use or much more liberal use of artillery in regards to going after the targets inside of some of these cities. But what I wanted to do is talk about some of the thought process behind why we're not seeing some of the Russian Air Force over Ukraine as we had anticipated, and I'll try to give some clarification on why that is. And obviously, on the surface, NATO and other Western military analysts are act as if they are stumped and say they don't understand why we have not seen the Russian Air Force take to the skies over most of the Ukraine. But I can guarantee you they do have a pretty good idea why that is. They're just at liberty not to say. And I'll try to explain what is happening and give you, the viewer, insight into what exactly is keeping some of these Russian aircraft from flying over large parts of Ukraine. So first and foremost, the Ukrainian Air Force, but more specifically its air defense forces, those are both radar ground stations and air or ground-to-air missiles that could target Russian aircraft. And the Ukrainians possess well over 100 S-300 systems. I'm sure most of you have heard about the deployment of the S-300 and the S-400. The S-300 a bit older and less range than the S-400, but is still a fairly capable system when facing off against a non-stealth aircraft. Furthermore, the Ukrainians possess quite possibly 1 to 200 both Cub and Buk medium-range systems and an estimated 100 Tor systems as well. So again, a very robust and fairly advanced air defense environment for the Russians to operate under. Now, most people would believe that the Russians would be able to enter Ukraine, identify the radars that are being used by the Ukrainians, the long-range radars, to identify Russian aircraft and to launch anti-radiation missiles at those ground stations. And the Russians have done that to a degree, but the Ukrainians have had the opportunity to turn a lot of those systems off, and especially their ground-to-air illuminators, which would be needed at times to target some of these Russian aircraft. And they don't have to activate these radar systems, which would give away their positions to the Russians. And the reason that is there is a high probability that U.S. Early warning aircraft, NATO, U.S. early warning aircraft, such as E-3 Sentries, are operating over both Poland and Romania, in which are transmitting the location of Russian inbound aircraft into Ukraine. So if an E-3 Sentry, you've probably seen those early warning aircraft. They have the big radar dome on the top of the aircraft, but the U.S. could deploy those systems to the northwest of Romania. I'm sorry, the northeast of Romania, and with those aircraft, they can see anywhere from 250 miles for low-flying aircraft, upwards to 400 plus miles for medium to high altitude aircraft. So again, the Ukrainians can simply turn their radars off and rely on direct communications with what, for all intents and purposes, are acting as allies with the Ukrainians right now in directing Ukrainian air defenses, in which they don't have to turn on some of these radar systems immediately to broadcast their locale, and are relying on U.S. E-3s operating in northeast Romania, also in southeast Romania. So an E-3 Sentry operating in southeast Romania or just over the Black Sea can see deep into Ukraine and can identify Russian aircraft that may be flying over southern Ukraine, and especially within the environments of Crimea. We also know that, again, they can fly over Poland in northeast Romania and identify, again, inbound Russian aircraft coming in even east of Kiev. So many of these air defense systems, which have been moved to western Ukraine, again, are still operational, and that's why we're continuing to see the Ukrainian Air Force in operation. Yes, the Russians can launch cruise missiles to try and strike some of these airfields, but again, the Ukrainians can move these aircraft around. They can use roadways to take off from if they need to. So again, very challenging situation right now for the Russians, with the U.S. operating these E-3 Sentries, giving the Ukrainians this long-range intel on the Russian air activity that could be taking place. So that is one reason why we're not seeing the Russians take to the sky in the kind of numbers that we thought they would. Again, if the Russians were to launch a strike package, now this is not cruise missiles. This would be a Russian version of the JDAM, dropping GLONASS guided bombs or laser guided bombs on targets in western Ukraine. Once the Russian aircraft cross over west of the Dnieper River, the Ukrainians can turn on their illuminators, because they're receiving information from these E-3 Sentries telling the Ukrainians, hey, you have Russian bogies inbound, go ahead and get ready to shoot them down. And I guarantee you, that's what is happening on the ground right now. And eventually the Russians are going to find workarounds for that. They're going to continue ground operations. They're going to continue utilizing cruise missiles and ballistic missiles to target some of these assets, the Ukrainian assets, when they can find out where they're at. And they're certainly going to do that. But again, the Russians are at a distinct disadvantage in terms of the U.S. deploying the E-3 Sentry early warning aircraft. The Russians do have similar systems. They don't have the same quantity, and they don't have the same quality of early warning aircraft that the United States has, that the United States is utilizing in northeastern Romania and western Poland. So that is why we're kind of seeing what we're seeing in terms of this possible hesitation by the Russians to deploy its air assets, especially over the western half of Ukraine. Again, most of the attacks that we're seeing right now are long-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles such as Iskanders, or standoff cruise missiles such as Kalibr or KH-101s that the Russians also possess. In terms of the battlefield situation right now, again, not a lot of changes. We continue to see the Russian forces maneuver in a manner that indicates that they're continuing to try to seal off Kiev. It is a process. The Ukrainians are still maneuvering in the field. This is not an insurgency army by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are still actively operating in brigades and battalion-sized formations, and in some instances are actually counterattacking Russian forces, because, again, the Russians do not have air superiority. They do not have now what I would even call air dominance. There's just really a lack of Russian aircraft at this point that is operating over Ukraine. And again, they're very deeply worried about, number one, the advantage in a long range early warning aircraft, and then again the Ukrainian air defense network, which is again very robust. And if we go back to the 1991 Gulf War, where we observed several U.S. planes shot down by the Iraqi air defense systems, the Ukrainians have a better air defense network than the Iraqis did, and definitely more advanced technology in terms of using some of those S-300 that are employed in some numbers by the Ukrainians. Yes, the Russians have destroyed some of them, but many of them are still actively defending Ukraine. Again, the major success right now is still in the south with the Russians. They've penetrated across the Dnieper River and have reportedly taken most of the river city of Kherson. Again, you can see here the areas in which the Russians occupy. Again, we're starting to see the more liberal use of artillery strikes by the Russians in an attempt to drive away these Ukrainian forces that are operating in these large cities. Now, with that being said, it is coming at a cost of the civilian population, and quite frankly, even some of the Russians are a little disgruntled about having to utilize heavy artillery in some of these built-up areas. But again, as the Russians proceed into these built-up areas, they come under sustained enemy fire, so they really don't have a choice but to eventually employ some of those artillery systems in these areas, the likes of which we have seen in the current conflict. But again, most of the success right now is coming from the breakout from the Crimea. Again, we're hearing mixed messaging in terms of if in fact Mariupol has been sealed off by the Russians. Yes, there is a possibility Russia has sealed off Mariupol. In terms of this map display, kind of conservative, and right now, again, unsure if in fact that has occurred. But Mariupol is very well defended at this point. But at the same time, we do know Mariupol is under some fairly hefty artillery attack at this point, much like we're seeing in Kharkov as well. We're seeing the Russians attempt to maneuver and seal off Kharkov. Again, this is a very large city. A very significant challenge if the Russians were to try to seize control of Kharkiv or Kharkov, however you want to pronounce it. Again, the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces have the opportunity to maneuver underground, under the city, utilizing the existing subway tunnels to maneuver their forces once they receive word that Russians have penetrated a certain district. And again, at some point, outside of capitulation, the Russians may have to actually enter some of these large subway tunnels and fight the Ukrainians, as that will probably be one of the methodologies that the Ukrainians use to move around these very large cities. And many of these subway tunnels were designed to be basically nuclear bomb-proof. They're very deep, very well constructed, and would obviously be used by the Ukrainian military against the Russians. And I think we're seeing that in other larger cities as well. But again, most eyes right now are on Kiev to see what happens with this column of Russian forces that we keep hearing about. The actual length of which we really don't know at this point. We've heard anything from 3 miles to 20 to 30 miles in length. But again, we really don't know. And ultimately, the Russians do appear to be attempting to circumvent, seal off Kiev. I highly doubt that we'll see a massed or attack into Kiev. Again, it's going to be very bloody. And again, very hard to say at this point if it would be successful. But my main concern as a viewer to what's going on and is what's going to happen along the border of Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, because again, it's at some point the Russians are going to need to seal this border off to prevent weapon systems from coming across into Ukraine, or this will be a never-ending war for the Russians that will drag on for some time. It's probably going to drag on for some time anyway, but the more weapons that come into Ukraine, the longer the Ukrainians are going to hold out and continue to fight until they're defeated on the battlefield and come to the personal conclusion that they've been defeated. And the only way to do that is to really dishearten the enemy, and that could be very, very brutal if the Russians decide to in fact do that, to make the Ukrainians believe that they have been defeated. And again, these are two industrial powers that are fighting each other, and you're going to have to harken back to World War II, and in which the Allies had to make the Germans understand they were being physically obliterated before they finally surrendered, and just like the Japanese did. So no different with the Ukrainians. I predict they'll continue to fight and probably won't capitulate only until they understand that quite possibly the Russians have defeated them. But again, that's going to come at some cost, and again, not just for the Ukrainians, but for the Russians as well, because this is going to be a bloody and long and drawn out affair that could drag in other actors. And again, Russia is a nuclear power, and I'm very concerned, especially after the State of the Union address last night. I think we're starting to see in the West what I would define as the wisdom of the mob. And we could be going into a realm in which some unwise decision-making processes start to occur in terms of Western partners not fully estimating what the Russian capacity is, or what the Russian will is, or what the Russian will could be, to turn this into something much greater than it currently is. But we'll stand by and report and have more very, very soon. Have a good day, everybody.